Coming up on the next American Black Journal, we're taking a look back at the Detroit case that became a national symbol of police brutality. Malice Green was killed by two police officers 30 years ago. And my special guest today is Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy, who prosecuted those officers. We'll talk about what happened then and what's happening now. Stay where you are. American Black Journal starts right now.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm your host, Stephen Henderson. In November of 1992, 35-year-old Detroiter Malice Green became the face of police brutality after he was beaten to death by two Detroit police officers. Green was an unarmed Black man. The two officers were white. The case drew national attention and pushed then Wayne County Assistant Prosecutor Kim Worthy into the spotlight. Following the conviction of the officers in 1993, Detroit Black Journal spoke with Kim Worthy and Larry Simmons, who at the time was the executive assistant to Mayor Coleman Young. Here's a portion of that episode, which was hosted by the late Cliff Russell.
You know, as interesting as the Malice Green trial has been, perhaps more interesting to me has been the response of some suburban brethren we have who want to have Butson and Nevers pardoned, who also are trying to raise monies for their defense. What is your read on that, Larry, and what does that say about where we are as a community and a region?
Well, you know, there are always indications, Cliff, that we are still cleaved in America, in this region, on the question of race. And all you have to do is listen to one of our local radio talk stations, and you will hear the sentiment that is now galvanized around exonerating these officers. I tell you, for me, the real story here is that 140 years after our parents were in slavery, and the American justice system said that we had no rights that a white man was bound to give credence to.
That was the law.
That was the law of the land from the Supreme Court. We had a trial in which the former slaves were adjudicating the offspring of former slave masters and did so fairly. There was not a wholesale conviction here. One person was found innocent, and all of the players in this, blacks and whites together, gave their best. Now, I tell you, I thought that they were guilty based on what I heard. But you know what? If that jury had found them innocent, that would have been the end of the story for me. Because what you had here, if we can't find fairness and justice in that situation, then there's none to be found in America. Unfortunately, when justice arrives and it doesn't go the way some people wanted to, who are accustomed to seeing us obedient and subservient, they think then that they have to overturn that. I feel sorry for them.
Let's talk about Butson and Nevers right now. Was that I won't say painful, but a difficult trial for you in the fact that these were police officers, that the case had received so much notoriety and attention in Detroit, that there was so much focus on you in this case?
It wasn't the most difficult case I'd ever done. It was the most challenging in the sense that Doug and I were constantly scrutinized and fly-specked and questioned about everything that we did. But we know that we had worked very hard and put together what we thought was a very solid case. And so I never lost my confidence that we were going to prevail. And I knew that it was tight. I knew that we had done everything that we could possibly do. And I knew that when I sat down at the end of my closing argument that there's nothing else that I could have done because I did my best. And so I felt really good about the work that both Doug and I did. So it was hard at first being microscope and fly spectrum, but you really forget about that. And I don't have a problem with my focus, and I was extremely focused on what I was supposed to be doing, and I really didn't think about what was going on around me.
Doug Baker, of course, is the other assistant Wayne County prosecutor who, as a team with Kim Worthy, were the prosecutors prosecuting Larry Nevers and Walter Butson. A lot of things have been said about your style. I've heard everything from very intense. Some people said a legal pit bull. How would you describe your How would you describe your style?
It's interesting. I don't think I was any more or less aggressive than any of the male attorneys that were practicing in that same case. And I think they're saying that about me. And I think mainly because I'm a woman. And I don't have any problem with that. I can't imagine prosecuting a homicide case when someone has lost a loved one. And when you have repercussions like we have for this trial, and being anything but aggressive and competent. I've always been very confident about my abilities, and I know that I am competent, so I just act accordingly. And I think that you have to be aggressive, you have to be insightful, you have to be intense sometimes.
Well, in fact, we have a little bit of you in the courtroom. Let's take a look now at Kim Worthy in action.
You were more concerned with getting your cigarettes, your lighter, and the ID card and the narcotics than you were than someone possibly killing your client, weren't you? Your partner, weren't you?
What do you want me to answer? I'm telling you what I saw.
That isn't what I asked you, because you've already clearly established you didn't see a thing. You didn't hear nothing, you didn't see nothing, you didn't do nothing.
Well, Your Honor, she's arguing with the witness at this point, and I would object to this line of questioning.
Well, there we have it. You seem to be giving it to Mr. Butson pretty strongly there on the stand. Is that your intent to, I won't say intimidate the person on the stand, but certainly cut it to the chase, put some pressure on them? Well,
it's not intimidation, it's cross-examination. And I thought his story was, and I call it a story deliberately, was highly incredible. And I wanted the jurors to be able to decipher that information for themselves. And there were questions that I think that everybody had, and I just asked them. I asked the questions that I thought they may have been wondering about as they listened to his testimony. And to me, it made absolutely no sense. And so I wanted him to tell me how it was that this could have happened the way he said it could.
So here we are 30 years later. What have we learned since Malice Green's death? And what has changed, if anything, in our city? I pose these questions and much more to Kim Worthy, who has now served as Wayne County prosecutor since 2004. Here's where I want to start. Talk about what the context was for this killing, who Butson and Nevers were, what department they were part of, and what was going on between Detroit police and Detroiters when they killed Malice Green.
Well, it's interesting. The context is very interesting because, as you will recall, and most people will recall, that this was right on the heels of the Rodney King verdict in California.
Yes.
And I always tell people that in that case, in our case anyway, there was no video. It wasn't. We did it the old-fashioned way with witnesses that were there who testified. But as you know, it was right kind of at the precipice of all the unrest that they were having in LA. And there was not only the acquittal of the officers that beat Rodney King, but also the riots were going on in LA and everywhere else. And there was Reginald Denny, who was pulled out of a truck when he was working, and he was beaten, and it was just a terrible thing that was going on. And quite frankly, I knew that the case was going on. I knew that there had been an acquittal. I knew that it had been moved to Simi Valley as opposed to staying in downtown LA, which I will never understand that decision, but that's not for me to understand, I guess. But, I was, not oblivious, but I was doing my cases, and I was working on a case, or I was already in trial in a case where a very elderly woman had been robbed and pushed down by two males, and she died. And so I was really ensconced in that case, trying it. And I was summoned to Mr. O'Hare's office, who was the prosecutor at the time, my boss. I was still an assistant back then, obviously. And he asked me to be one of the prosecutors trying this case. And but I'm in another case, and so kind of had to do it simultaneously. So he put together a team of prosecutors to decide what the charges were going to be. I was a part of that team, working on that by night and by day, trying my case. And we made that charging decision. And back then, that was not a popular decision for John O'Hare. And as you know, he barely squeaked by a re-election his next election cycle, mainly because of this case, because he did just very, very quickly, as he would want us to do the right thing. And it didn't matter what the fallout was going to be. He didn't put any pressure on us. He just told us to go and make the right decision.
Yeah.
The right decision was charging, obviously, in that case, charging homicide in that case. There had never been at that time, and really even, well, I guess there has been today, but there had never at that time been a successful prosecution of on-duty police officers for murder. This had never happened, and we were the first. And so that was kind of the climate that was going on at the time. And I wouldn't say protests were sweeping the nation like happened with George Floyd and others, but it was a very heightened alert type situation. And I remember it was Coleman Young was the mayor then, and he was kind of near the end of his tenure and was very interested in this case and said some things in his Coleman-esque kind of way that we had to deal with almost each and every time during the trial. And we certainly had to deal with it during jury selection.
Yeah.
And so, getting a jury was difficult. It was we did it the way that we do in Wayne County that many people had not heard of. We had a one jury for each defendant. And then I always say, and I thought this was critical, so we didn't have the unrest that they had in LA. Don Barton, who was the owner of Barton Cablevision, made the decision, and I don't know how it happened, but made the decision that he was going to show this trial gavel to gavel on free TV.
Yeah.
Whether you had Barton Cablevision or not. And that to me was a stroke of genius, because I firmly believe, even if there had not been a conviction in this case, that Detroit wouldn't have gone up in flames. Because people saw every single day us fighting really hard and honestly and earnestly. This was not a sham prosecution. People saw that we were really trying to convict these officers for murdering Malice Green.
Yeah.
And they saw our witnesses. They saw everything that we did was on camera and on full display. Because remember, at that time, Stephen, there was no court TV in Detroit at that time.
Right. That's right.
And so that was the only way that the citizens can I want to say stream in, but that wasn't called that. You can turn on their TV and see it every day.
Yeah.
And I really think that that's what helped this city heal, if we ever really healed, but heal at the time. During that case.
So I always think of kind of the irony of one part of this that you mentioned, which was that, Coleman Young was the mayor here, the first Black mayor of the city, elected in 1973 on a platform of reforming police brutality, particularly against African Americans. The stress units that were patrolling the city back in the 70s were the reason. He said that we needed new leadership and a different approach to the department. 20 years later, almost, it felt like we hadn't made the progress that his election promised.
It was very ironic, and I think it's not for lack of trying on his case, because remember at the time we had a Black police chief, and remember Coleman Young had announced he wasn't running again. Dennis Archer was running. And so he was, he wasn't going to be the mayor anymore, but he was tuned into this case like no other. And I remember Bob Berg, who was, one of the ones that worked very closely with him. Younger people won't remember, but he kept me really, really posted on, what the mayor thought. It didn't have anything to do with our case, obviously, because we were going to do the right thing, no matter who the person was that wanted to inquire. But it was just a different dynamic. And Detroit has always been different than any place else in the country. And we've always had our own mindset, our own ways, our own, kind of our own mores, our own traditions. And because they saw what we were doing, people understood that we were trying to hold these officers accountable. And I lost friends, quote unquote friends, over this. I mean, for the most part, the white police officers wouldn't talk to me. And some of them haven't talked to me, 30 years later. A lot of the Black officers were split. Very, very few thought that they should be charged with murder. There were most of the well, a good number of Black officers felt they should have been charged with manslaughter. They thought that murder was going too far, although it was when you pummel someone in the head with flashlights. I don't know what it is other than murder.
Mhm.
And so a lot of Black officers never spoke to me again. I really think it's a testament to the jurors who were on that case. Of course, when they were convicted, of course, people say, well, it's because it was a Black jury. But then they forget the rest of the story, that one jury was out 8 days and the other jury was out 9 days.
Mhm.
So this certainly wasn't a group of Black folk rushing to judgment, just wanted to pin a murder on 2 white cops. They took 8 and 9 days because it's excruciating. If you talk to trial attorneys, they will tell you one of the most excruciating, if not the most excruciating part of a trial is waiting for that verdict. And we had to wait for over a week for both of them. And so they took everything seriously. They asked good questions. We had Judge George Crockett III, who was just a great jurist who, you know, and I don't want to say he bent over backwards to make sure justice was done, because that's what he did. He always made sure that justice was done.
Let's fast forward to Detroit of today. And something really important, of course, happens between back then and now in terms of police reform in Detroit. And that's that, you know, we have a consent agreement with the Justice Department to really clean up some of the routine constitutional violations that have been going on for years and years in Detroit. And I always point to that as kind of the North Star for understanding how the department functions now. It's not perfect. We still have issues, but it is really different from the department back then. But I wonder, from your chair as prosecutor and as the person who prosecuted these police officers 30 years ago, how differently the department looks now.
Well, it is different. It's different in many ways. First of all, it's a lot smaller than it was. You know, there were a lot more people. You know, I didn't live in Detroit in its heyday when you had 2 million people and you had Black Bottom and you had, you know, I wish I could have lived in Detroit back then. And so the department, I believe at the time we did the Butson Nevers case, I believe it was like either 4,000, 4,500, at one point 5,000 officers, but I don't think it was 5,000 officers when we did this case. And, you know, really large department. It's not in LA or New York, but a very large department. And, you know, now I want to say there's under 2,800, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we're less than half, I think, of what.
But of course we have, you know, probably we have a lot less people too. And so in Detroit, and so, you know, just different, you know, we've had, I believe it's 9 different changes of leadership since then in terms of chiefs of police, maybe 10, maybe more, which each new chief has their own agenda, his or her, because we've had one female, has their own agenda, their own, when I say own agenda, I don't mean that in a bad way, but different focuses that they want to focus on, different things they want to focus on. And it's been kind of a different road every time we get a new chief. My favorite is the chief we have now. I think he's wonderful. He's we don't always agree, obviously, you don't always agree with anybody, but he is dedicated. He doesn't have an agenda. He's not looking for a stepping stone to go someplace else. He wants the department to run properly, and will own up to mistakes, wants to correct things that are wrong. And it's a very good relationship in terms of seeing someone who has their eye on doing right and wanting the officer to do things right. It hasn't always been like that. All we want to do here at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office is deliver justice. It doesn't matter who you are, how much money you have, what your ethnicity is, what your occupation is. We want to do right. At least that's what we strive for. We're not afraid to bring charges against officers for varying reasons. You know, people get mad at us when we don't bring charges, but we are not going to put a case into the system to the best of our ability if we can't prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, even though the public may think that person is guilty as hell.
Yeah. So you had a recent case where I think, you know, people were a little upset about you not filing charges in the Porter Burks case, shot many times by officers, a guy with mental health problems. He did have a knife, but talk about the contrast between that decision and
well, you know, it's
Malice
we
Green.
we can't charge what we can't prove. The standard for a criminal case is very, very high. It's not, the standard is not we think he's guilty. The standard is not the officer shouldn't have done what they did. The standard is not, you know, well, they're guilty minimally, or the standard is not they're guilty, but we can't prove it. And so the releases we send out, I don't know, sometimes people don't read them, I'm sure, but we could not prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. There were witnesses, independent witnesses on the scene that said to us during our investigation, more than one, that the police did everything that they could to de-escalate that situation. And when he charged at them and covered all that space in a matter of less than 3 seconds with that knife, knowing the history that this young man had, there was really no other option that we can come up with. We can't prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very clear self-defense, defense of others cases. And it's a lot that people don't understand, but we're going to take the hit. If we don't think we can prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, then we're not going to charge it. We have other cases that we have charged, many other police officers that we have charged. And there were a different segment of people that were unhappy with us then. It's kind of like when I first became the prosecutor, trying to repair the relationships between myself and some of the out-county departments outside the city of Detroit. Detroiters loved me for the most part. The suburbs hated me for the most part. Kind of the opposite when I prosecuted the former mayor. Detroiters hated me. So it's just about, you don't go by the court of public opinion. You go by justice. You go by the evidence. You go by the facts. And sometimes people are not going to like your decisions, but that's just the way it is. And unfortunately, we always try to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And then when mistakes, yeah, go ahead.
So I want to talk just a little about you and the difference between you then and now. This is how you become a huge public figure here in Detroit. You become a judge after that, and then become the prosecutor. Do you feel like this was the defining moment in the trajectory of your career, prosecuting Budson and Nevers?
I'm not sure it's the defining moment. It's certainly a very important moment. It's work that I'm proud of. There's still people that are mad about it, 30 years later. But it's something I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the fact that John O'Hare allowed us to charge, but allowed us to make the decision without any kind of influence over us, that he was willing to take the political hit, and boy, did he take that political hit. And that really shaped me into the prosecutor I am today, because I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be someone who made decisions based on the law and the facts. And it sounds so trite, but that's what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to worry about, people coming to my house. And this has happened in a couple of occasions, and protesting. And because they don't like a decision that I make, or they don't think we're not moving fast enough. If nothing else, I want people to think of me that we did the right thing, even if it was unpopular. Because you know what? 9 times out of 10, when time goes by, they say, okay, that's what she was doing. That's exactly what happened with the former mayor. People didn't understand what we did. People said, it happened during election year for me, so it would have been very easy for me not to prosecute the mayor and not to suffer the political flack and get reelected. But when later on, when things happened and more things came, oh, okay, that's why she did what she did. And so, but I just want people to know that I did the right thing based on the evidence and based on the facts. And we weren't afraid to tackle the tough cases where we were going to be endlessly criticized for years and years and years later. And then I can look in the mirror and I can know that I represented the people of the county, all of the people, not just a certain segment, but every single citizen in Wayne County.
That is going to do it for us this week. Thanks for watching. You can find out more about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And as always, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal, partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you. Thank you.